By now, I'm betting you guys are probably sick of seeing these shapes and wanting not to shade these shapes in anymore, and I fully understand that. Still lifes and things like that have always been boring to me, but as artists, we want to understand that they are an important thing fundamentally. And just like if you guys have ever checked out my figure drawing videos, clothes figure drawing perspective, the simple thing that I always say is that we're starting with one big shape. We're starting with shapes. We're going to build this up with simple shapes. I repeated it like a parrot over and over and over. And that couldn't be more true when it comes to applying value and shades to whatever we want to apply value and shades to. So we learn these for a reason. We learn these because if we can learn how to shade in cylinders and pyramids and cones and all that stuff, right? All the stuff that we see in front of us. These are the basic shapes that will eventually make up our drawings. And it could be anything. It could be trees, it could be buildings, it could be realistic people, it can be cartoony people, it can be characters that we know and love. So a more fun way to practice values and shapes onto objects that we care about is to look at the characters that we know and love. And so here, there is no shading, right? Why am I showing you this? It's just a character turnaround sheet. This is something that if you guys are ever interested in animation, really important aspect of animation. But the reason I'm showing this here is because this is all about the shapes of our character. And when we're thinking about taking a 2D character and thinking about them in a 3D space, or what would they look like if they were 3D forms, which is what, the artist is trying to illustrate as a 2D drawing. We're understanding that there's volume here, that this part of the belly is in front of this leg, but this leg is in front of the belly, right? So we're being told these 3D cues, but what if we were to come in and add value and shade like we did to shapes? Basically, to be able to break this down, all we need to do is remember the shapes that we already learned and break these characters down into those shapes. So here's a really good turnaround for Homer Simpson here, right? I think we all know the Simpsons, and you can really see that they really broke him down into the shapes that he is, right? And he's basically just a buildup of spheres and long tubes or cylinder shapes, right? You might get something like a pyramid shape on his sleeve there a little bit of a different kind of shape in his shoe. But for the most part, we're not seeing anything that we're not familiar with. So we're going to look at this and understand how can we build this up in 3D form and value. And just one last example of this, since I found this online, and I thought this stuff was super helpful. Just to kind of see like the shapes that they do use to break these things down. Sometimes when we see like the finished product, we can't really remember that it started here. This is literally just a rectangle with like rounded sides, right? So it's essentially a cylinder, or you could just think of it as a nice rounded rectangle, whatever it is that helps you draw it. Again, I'm just really trying to further enforce that we just need to stop for a second, break things down in our head, not let us see so much of the complication, but just see the simple shapes that exist within, and then we're going to utilize that to our advantage today. So the first character we're going to start with is Winnie the Pooh. Now, I found a sculptural picture of Winnie the Pooh, maybe when they were creating a 3D model for it, or maybe this is just some fan art, I'm not sure, but this is what we're going to kind of base everything off of today. So this is going to help us to start this off, but the other characters we look at today, we're going to be seeing more so a flat version of them. So when we're looking at our other characters today, we're going to be looking at something like this and thinking, well, now we have to self-break down these shapes into circles, and like what kind of shape is going on here. Now here in the middle, you can see, obviously we have a pretty nice rendered Winnie the Pooh. The shadows are very, soft and nothing too harsh or anything like that, but you can see the thought process. And if you actually compare the two of these guys, there's a lot of similarities going on, right? Like we're just kind of realizing that he has this deep indented brow ridge, and look, you see that shadow over here. You got shadow underneath the nose, but of course it catches a nice deal of reflective light, and then we see that happening right there on the real model. This was, this picture in the middle right here was just an artist rendering, and I don't think that they were looking at anything like the figure on the left. But you can see that because the artist understood value so well, and he was able to break down shapes, or whoever the artist was, right? they were able to create something that almost looks exactly like this. They knew their shapes very well. So today our goal is to create something similar to the middle object, but we do want to be nice and rough. So at this point, you guys probably don't need me to repeat this, but all I'm going to say this just one time. These are the shapes that we need to be thinking about and looking at. We have our sphere, we have our cube, we have our cylinder, and we have our cone shapes. There are variations of these shapes in all different shapes and sizes. They get oblong, they turn into trapezoids, whatever it is. These are going to be our basic forms and shapes. So I'm going to leave those shapes up on the top corner there as we draw our figure, just as a good reminder that we're trying to break everything down into those shapes. So I already did a little bit of a shape breakdown on Winnie the Pooh here, but why don't we go ahead and do this together so you guys can kind of see the thought process that I go through. So we're looking at a figure like this. A lot of information is already being given to us because this figure does have a shadow. It does have a single light source and all that good stuff. So some of the guesswork is taken out of play here, but look for the big shapes, the big obvious shapes like we saw with the Homer character design. So here we have a nice big sphere for Winnie the Pooh's big belly. All we're seeing here is nice cylinder shapes that end up being nice and rounded at the end. So that rounded shape is going to create kind of a finish that looks similar to the sphere. So you have, the tube over here, and then tube right here for the legs as well. Break that down real quick. And then of course, nothing but another ball shape down here for the feet. The nose is going to be pretty much a ball shape, right? It's a little bit different. And then the way that I thought about the head a little bit, just because you're seeing a little bit of shadow side over here, and then if you look really closely, it might be this picture's blown out a little bit, but there is a little bit of shadow over here as well. What I mean is essentially like this spot right here in the middle is the brightest. Okay, put a B there for a second. But anyways, so you're kind of seeing like a rounded square shape that has this indented groove into it, which is giving us that shadow underneath the eye. It's his brow line, right? It's pretty similar to how humans have a brow line, and then we do usually get that shadow over our eyes. So for me, I'm seeing this more as like a square shape, and then you're kind of seeing a little bit of the bottom of the square shape here. However you guys need to see it, essentially I'm just breaking it down to we have more light up here, less light down here. And then for the mid part of the torso, essentially we're just looking at like a nice big tube kind of shape there. So a little bit of like a cylinder shape, I suppose. Other than that, guys, let's keep this nice and simple. Try not to overthink it. Be nice and rough with it. This is just practice, so we're not looking for a hyper-realistic 3D Winnie the Pooh. But just something that you guys start to kind of figure out that value for yourself and break down these shapes in your head. Because again, I'm going to repeat this over and over in any video that I create from now and on. Everything is going to be built up with these shapes, and if you can learn them, you can learn how to shade them without any reference, straight from your imagination, and that's my goal. So let's draw Winnie the Pooh. Alright guys, so first thing, remember, always lay down your tone. You guys know this by now when we're doing value studies, right? It's about that value relationship. So whatever that tone is in the background is going to make the tones and the shades that you add to whatever you're drawing either darker or lighter by comparison. Main reason we're doing this is because we're trying our very, 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 very best not to go full black or full white, okay? We're still sticking to that. I know when you look at pictures, it's easy to just say that's black, this is white. Throw on a super white highlight, throw on a super, super dark black shadow. We just want to do our best to avoid that and play up value relationships rather, okay? So this isn't a video about drawing these characters necessarily, so I don't want to speak to that too much, but obviously I did leave the drawing process in here so that way you guys could draw along with me and then, shade it with me after. I do want to say also really quick, while we're doing Winnie the Pooh. A couple things about the rest of this video too. These value studies did take me a while. I don't want you guys to think that you do have to be able to knock these things out as fast as it's going right now. If you guys can't tell, it's obviously sped up video, and I sped it up the best I could to try to aim for that 30-minute zone that I try to aim for. So I do apologize if it goes too fast. Just try your best to keep up. Remember, it's YouTube. You can always pause it and stick and hang out wherever you need to stop the video. And otherwise, I just want to emphasize too that this is about value studying. If you guys want to spend all your time on one character, that's perfectly fine, but you're not going to get a good range of shapes, you know, if you just stick to one character. So the values that I've applied are very rough, and I didn't spend a lot of time smoothing and blending and all that stuff. And, you know, I'm not saying you guys shouldn't. If that's what you guys want to do, go for that. But I just want to let you know why these might come out looking a little bit rougher on my side. So now that we're adding tone to Winnie the Pooh here, my drawing's done. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in and completely look for the entire shadow family on Winnie the Pooh himself. I'm just referencing the 3D model over there. It's giving me all the information I need, but I am trying to also remember in my head, like, I'm thinking where that light source is, and then kind of figuring out in my head, well, why is there shadow here? Sometimes, you know, when we're trying to understand value especially, you want to remember you're not always going to have a reference, or you might have a reference, but it might not be a good reference. Or you might have a reference and you want to change the shadows completely, or add more shadows, make it more dynamic. So these are things to think about, right? So just make sure you're kind of doing the thought process in your head too, right? Like, I can see I can see that there is shadow on Winnie the Pooh here, but when you're putting it in, ask yourself why. So again, we're just going through and adding the whole shadow family here. This is all just one value. If you guys see it kind of getting like darker and lighter in some areas, that's because I'm drawing with the opacity pressure on. And what that means is essentially, like, the harder I draw, the darker it draws. But if I lift my pen up and then draw over something, it's essentially like working with watercolor, where it's going to do another layer on top. And so that's going to give me like dark splotchy spots sometimes. I like to use it because then it just kind of has me go over things a little bit more. It forces me to be a little smoother at times, but that's just me. But I just want to kind of explain that if you guys are, you know, don't copy me fully. Like, don't just copy all the random dark spots. So here I'm going in and throwing in my core shadow. I'm playing it up pretty hard here. You guys can look over at the figure yourself. It's not that hard. It's pretty soft on there. But again, I'm trying to overemphasize these things so you guys really kind of have an understanding of what's going on there. Otherwise, now we're coming into the light family here, and I want to push those values a little bit. I thought the background value that I threw down a little light for, you know, what we're doing here. So I wanted to push that a little bit, come in there with a little more of a controlled mid-tone. So I'm kind of saying that the background tone is going to be more of my light family, highlighted family kind of area, and then I'm coming in with a bit of a mid-tone value, right? And the mid-tone value is what's going to be more true to the actual value of what we're drawing. All right, so you just want to figure out some of the sections here, like the shirt and the hand. Again, we're just sticking nice and rough, so I really just want to play with, you know, what we were practicing already. Coming back into some of the shapes and adding that reflective light. You know, I can see it nice and hard on the stomach. I can see it really glowing in light on the bottom of that nose. And I know I said earlier the nose kind of follows a little bit of a circle format, but actually it kind of follows more of a very, very rounded cone shape coming towards you, which is why it creates that kind of triangle shadow. If you guys see it a little bit to the right side of the nose there, going down to the mouth. So that's why you have that shape in there. It's a little more cone shaped than it would be circular. All right, so tossing down some cast shadow here. You want to remember that cast shadow also plays a role on your character or your drawing as well. So like, for instance, on the right side of Winnie the Pooh's leg there, our right, you can see that his belly created a cast shadow right onto his leg. Now to punch up some of my values, remember I talked about this at the beginning, value relationships matter. So I thought my values were kind of not pushed enough, and I definitely could go back in and push these values a lot. I can make this a lot more dramatic. But because value relationships exist and it's a thing, all I have to do is throw a nice dark shade, not black, not full black, nice dark shade next to my drawing, and boom, values are punched up a bit. Of course, you can go in and punch things up more. Here, I'm just going to throw in a quick highlight just to kind of really solidify that shape, and then we're going to move on to our next character. So the next one we're going to look at is Homer Simpson. Now, one of the reasons I chose Homer was because when I was doing this particular lesson in art school, yes, that's right, I went through the same things you guys are going through. Here is the thing I created. So I did this with charcoal, which when you're doing value studies, I kind of do recommend working with charcoal if you can. It's going to be one of the easier ways to go from lights to darks, and really just kind of push in values and stuff. But you can do it with anything. I mean, you guys see me doing it with digital stuff, so, you know, by all means do it with whatever you like. But as you guys can see, it's kind of quick, it's kind of dirty. We're just kind of trying to get the idea of what is a sphere, what is a tube, what is square. Obviously there's no square things in here. And we have a similar picture that we're going to be working from. So we'll take this at a different rate here. What I'm thinking is, you know, these are shapes we're looking at. Maybe on this one, since Winnie the Pooh, we kind of did the whole picture at once, like kind of working top to bottom, back and forth. On this one, let's go shape to shape and see how that works out. All right, so if you guys are wondering too what those lines are on the left side, those are head sizes. Those are just for proportions. If you guys are trying to draw these things proportionally, you know, that's kind of how I like to do my thing. But that's just my method. You guys don't have to follow that. Again, you know, we're just caring about the basic shapes of what we're drawing, not necessarily proportions here. So as long as he has a nice round stomach and some tube legs, you could draw him super stumpy, kind of like how mine turns out to be, honestly. My proportions, even though I did those head sizes, still got messed up. So, or you can draw a super long Homer. I don't know, mess around with it. All right, so we're just kind of playing around here. So Homer is legitimately just built up of shapes. Winnie the Pooh has some like complicated different oblong shapes here. But Homer Simpson and most of the Simpsons characters were purposely made to be just kind of like as simple as possible. You know, it was just made to be able to animate with ease. And whether you like that style or not, the beauty of it in terms of how we can see it for our art here, it works really well. All right, so I'm just kind of playing around with my figure a little bit. I have a problem drawing small, so my proportions get kind of messed up. I probably could have came in and shrank the head a little bit and all that stuff. But here we are. So now I'm just going to kind of finish off my drawing a little bit. Feel free to clean up your drawing. Sometimes you can leave the shape drawings there if you want, if it helps you to remember what shape you're doing, all that stuff. And I got a little too involved with the details here. Try not to get too involved with the character details because a lot of that is going to be lost in some of the shapes you create. Because again, we're not really here to be worrying about the character details necessarily. All right, so we don't have a 3D form here, right? So I have to be thinking about where my light source is. Just to make it easy, we're going to be creating the same light source that Winnie the Pooh had on all these characters we draw. So if you can remember what Winnie the Pooh looked like, and just kind of think, how would that lighting scenario apply here? Up there to the right of Homer, what I did was, I'm just sticking with one value scheme for this one. So I'm not thinking about different tonal values on the pants and the shirt and the skin, is what I mean by that. So here I have my shadow and my core shadow. And then I'm going to stick with the same kind of format I did with Winnie the Pooh, where the background value is kind of like my lightest tone. Not in terms of highlight, but just the lightest tone that exists on my form without the light source shining bright on it. So that's going to be my background tone there. Don't forget that background tone too. I know I just have it in there as a solid gray tone, but put it in if you're using pencil, charcoal, paint. You know, make sure you have that background tone. It's really important. here on the legs, what I'm thinking about is first they're tubes, they're cylinders, right? So how do you shade cylinders? And then similar scenario that happened with Winnie the Pooh. We had a nice big cast shadow being created from that belly onto the leg. I don't think that's going to be any exception in terms of Homer's belly for that rule, so I made sure to go ahead and throw in that cast shadow right away. Now, I'm kind of thinking about some of that separation on the chest and the stomach there. What would it look like? And again, I'm just really playing around and kind of playing with the rules of the shapes here. One thing that's really important to note too, I think, while drawing these characters, is that these characters weren't really meant to be shaded in this way. And, you might have seen that with Winnie the Pooh. You might have thought that 3D figure looked, a little off. It didn't look as cute as Winnie the Pooh, right? And then same with Homer here. Same with the other character we're going to draw today too. Yes, 3D models of Homer and Winnie the Pooh and stuff like that do exist, but you notice when they make them, there are design changes. They're not always the same, right? There's little things that they change on purpose, because these 2D designs, while they do give us a depth of space, they weren't exactly meant to actually look 3D realistically, I would say personally. You guys can argue that point if you like, but that's my personal opinion. And I think that's why these things always kind of come out looking a little silly. Also, when we are applying the lighting sources that we know from shapes, what we're going to end up getting is something that looks kind of shiny too, because most of the shapes that we draw are kind of like a white painted surface or something like that. So it's shiny. It catches light really well. You're not going to get that on skin and clothes and stuff like that. So that's why this also might look a little funny too. Skin and clothes is going to have more of a dulling effect to light and shadow. So that's important to remember. That could be another whole video in itself, though, how lighting and shade affects different types of fabrics and different types of surfaces. All right, so now I'm just kind of going in and just kind of punching things up here. So I threw in my core shadow all around. I took it slow and I kind of went shape by shape on this one. We're still figuring out some of the shapes here, right? That mouth is kind of like a half circle. The head is just kind of like a big tube with a round edge on it. So kind of playing around with that. And you kind of get a circular effect, but I'm really just kind of thinking of it as a cylinder. And then just kind of punching up values where I think. Now this part of the arm is a little bit tricky because you have the top portion of the arm would technically be casting down a cast shadow. So I just went ahead and fully darkened it in for now. We can always come in and relighten it up a little bit like I did there. And just with this lighting source, basically what we're going to be getting is just a light on to that left part of the upper or the lower arm there, right? The forearm. And you can always come back in and kind of add in some nice strong reflective light, like right there, on the arm, and keep that 3D form. But for the most part, if we're just thinking about cast shadow and stuff like that, the forearm is going to be casting down. All right, so we have some wedge shapes here. I'm kind of shading them in terms of like imagining they are just a little bit like a cylinder shape. And I didn't want them to be too shiny, so I kind of threw a nice tone on them. And then now I'm just going to go through and add some highlight shapes. And there's things I would definitely change about this, but again, I was just trying to see this as a shape per shape thing. So that's why it kind of came out looking a little weird. But, it's good practice nonetheless. So we're going to toss in a quick cast shadow here. I'm just trying to emphasize in the cast shadow the roundness of his belly. This cast shadow is not exactly accurate, but it was fun. And again, just to kind of punch up some of the values because the tone in the background is so light, you can always come in here and add a bit of a darkness, especially for my people who are outlining fiends and you have to outline your drawing. Well, don't outline in this scenario, but do throw in a dark tone and see how you like that. And you can check out that value relationship right there. For our last one, we're going to be drawing SpongeBob, or at least I'm going to be drawing SpongeBob. I put Patrick there because I drew him for the opening. And if you guys want to draw him, who am I to stop you from drawing that cute pink starfish? But I'm going to be drawing SpongeBob for this one, just also because we drew two characters who are kind of more rounded base shapes. So I thought it'd be a good switch up to draw something that's a little more square based, right? Or, technically boxy. I went with a darker tone in the background here. What I wanted to do with this was make sure the tone is the shadow's shape, or the shadow tone, the shadow value. And what I mean by that is I'm also going to be doing the values of the particular tones that we see on our character. So the yellowness of the sponge is going to be a value, the whiteness of the shirt is going to be a value, the brown of the pants is going to be a value, the dark of the shoes, which I'm not going to go full black, by the way. I'm going to make those a nice dark gray, but I'm not going to go full black like it is in the cartoon. But those are going to be their own value, because this is how you actually want to shade things in real life. So while I kind of finish drawing the character here, you'll start to see as I start to shade things in. Now, purposely, I left out some details on here. I'm going to draw the face and everything like that, but I didn't draw like the tie and the collar and the belt and stuff like that, just because I don't want to get bogged down with things like that. That's not the purpose. This isn't a drawing a SpongeBob class. He's a really simple character, and I'm sure Nickelodeon's done a million videos about how to draw SpongeBob, so go check those out if you're curious about how to draw SpongeBob. He's not my character, so I don't want to teach you guys how to draw him either, right? I don't want Nickelodeon coming knocking on my door, unless it's to hire me. Nickelodeon, what's up? Otherwise, we are going to be adding in some value here. So the yellow part of him is pretty much the brightest part of him, except for obviously how stark white his shirt, eyes, and teeth are. So I'm going to add a pretty nice light value here on his surface layer of yellow. Now, this is black and white, but this would be the mimicking that value of the yellow on SpongeBob. So I'm going to put this everywhere where I see SpongeBob's skin. I'll put it on the arms in a second. And anyway, so the shirt is white, right? Does that mean we go full white? This is the first excuse to do it? No. Just like I'm not going to do it for the shoes, I'm not going to do it for the eyes, teeth, shirt, collar, sleeves, whatever it is. I'm not going to do it. It does look stark white, doesn't it? But it's actually not. It's a very light gray for sure. It's almost white. But the value relationships, here it comes, right? I'm going to bring everything back around. The value relationships are making it look much whiter than it is. So now I kind of figure this out. Now on the side, he obviously has just a shadow. We already know that. I mean, the artist gave us that already in his 2D design. So remember, I'm just trying to think of things. I'm trying to separate the shapes right now by what their actual value and tone is. His shirt is a different tone. Sorry, I keep saying tone. His shirt is a different value from his let's call it skin. His yellow sponge part, his skin. His skin is a different tone. Oh my gosh, tone or value, right? Than his pants, his brown part of his pants, and it's a different value than his shoes. So you got to show that. And then when it goes to the shadow shape, it's going to show that, the right side of SpongeBob's body, the skin part of his body is going to be my tone of the background. But that means that the brown part of his pants in shadow is going to be darker than that tone, because the brown of his pants are naturally darker than the yellow of his skin. And that is a part that exists within creating values on characters. If you draw a character, maybe your character is wearing nothing but blue jeans and he's a Caucasian person. So that character, those blue jeans are probably going to be darker than his skin tone, right? These are the things I'm talking about. So now I'm going to go in. We've already kind of figured out shadow shapes and stuff like that. You can see I added in some cast shadow of the bottom of his body, kind of casting onto the little shorts he wears. And I threw in that core shadow really nice and hard along the side of his body. And then here I'm just kind of picking up a little bit of reflective light. And if you guys look, you can see I didn't draw in that top right corner of his head. I don't need to. You don't need to. We already know. We're given so much information here. And this is why I wanted to do the shadow shape as the tone of the background, that our brain fills it in naturally. The viewer, whoever you're showing to, they know. They fill it in themselves. So I'm thinking of the shoes here as two cylinders, kind of. I mean, that's what they are. They're kind of just like flattened cylinder shapes that he's standing on. And now I want to punch up some of the values in his face. Within his mouth, there's going to be a gradient. It's going to be darker as it goes further back into his mouth and lighter as it goes forward. His lips are going to be doing a cast shadow onto his teeth. and so on and so forth. So, you know, you have the ball shape of the cheeks there. And, you know, I'm just kind of really playing into this one. Okay, this one took me a while. This one definitely took me almost an hour to do. So again, I do want to kind of mention that so you guys don't think you have to go as fast as me. Here we go, playing up the core shadow, or sorry, the cast shadow of the nose and the core shadow underneath the nose there. And then we're just kind of going in now and picking out the little details. So, you know, we see things like, well, his eyes are ball shapes, right? So I'm going to go in there and play around with that as well. So you got the shadow, add the core shadow in there as well. Things like that. So then we can kind of come in and reflective light and play around with that. And you guys can see this is looking a little more finished than the last couple ones I did. I took my time with this one. You know, I went really rough and dirty with the last ones, and I was like, I need to prove it to myself that I could do it. I was going to say I need to prove it to you guys, but realistically, who am I trying to prove it to? I'm trying to prove it to myself here, and perhaps Mr. SpongeBob. So going over to the cast shadow, it looks dark. I know it looks dark, and I'm going to tell you it's pretty close to black, but guess what? It's not. It is not black. Hopefully you guys are starting to get that by now. But just kind of messing around with the core shadow. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger here. I want it to be nice and dramatic. There we go. And now it kind of really feels like SpongeBob's getting hit by that light. All right, thank you guys for sticking around for this whole video. I know it was a long one, but, you know, it had a lot of process to it. What we're going to be doing next week is we're actually going to be applying some of these techniques that we've learned to realistic objects and body forms and stuff like that. But between now and then, it is your turn to choose your favorite character. It can be these ones, it can be another one, it doesn't matter. And give this a practice on your own. Who's your favorite character and what would they look like in a 3D space? Try it out. You never know. You might actually really like it. It's great practice, I promise you. All right, guys. Again, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.